All right. So those of you that have issues with Discord and watching on there, you can move over to Google and you should be able to watch the live stream there. Phone, I am not talking to you. Okay. So REST. Again, this is for going over what REST API is and talking about it. We've clicked on the Red Hat and IBM definition. If you don't know what these companies are, please familiarize yourself with them. IBM used to be massive before the cloud boom. They lost a lot of their ground because they were sellers of the server stack to companies, and you would just run that internally. But now with cloud services, they were slow to adjust, so they lost a lot of traction. They now offer their own cloud, but I don't know really anyone that uses their cloud solely. Maybe they'll use one of their products. Usually it's just Watson, which is their AI product. That and the Quantum, they are definitely, arguably not the lead, but they have the lead purely because they have the best Quantum setup, in the sense that you can just download their repo and get going, and you can connect to their Quantum computers for free. They have most of their Quantum computers free for you to use if you would like. All right, back on the topic. REST provides a flexible, lightweight way to integrate applications and have emerged as the most common method for connecting components in microservice architectures. So, what does this mean? Well, let's go into this bad boy right here. So, an API is an application programming interface. It's just a way for you to define how other things can use your product, whether that's a repo, a piece of software, a website, whatever. That's an API is just a way to integrate with it. Now, a REST API is specific because it uses state transfer architectural styles. Let me zoom in here so you guys can see. Representational state transfer architecture style. So this is basically what REST stands for. Usually it's called RESTful, but REST is the quick abbreviated. It's just a way to send data across the internet. Now, this is not typically for HTML data transfers. Usually, back in the day, XML was the shit. Everyone used XML, and so if you had a REST API, you would transfer data across your REST API, typically via XML. Now, that's not really the case. Typically, you use JSON right now. That's the most popular method for transferring data across the internet because it's way more lightweight than XML, because XML has a lot of boilerplate that makes your connection a lot more heavy. Now, the thing is, REST APIs are stateless, which means once they happen, and you can't just keep a connection ongoing. It's just a one and done thing. You want a list of posts I've done for the last 3 days. All right, you request that, you get it, it's done. You can't just keep that connection active and ongoing. It's a one and done. You asked, you got, it's over. So there's a lot of benefits for using REST APIs. Depending on where you dev this out at, you can easily integrate cacheability of common requests, which can serve up your requests way faster. Also, you use the uniform identifier. So basically, you guys will know this as your URL. You can modify your URL and get different queries out of it. That's the great thing about REST API, is you can just modify the URI and get a different request each single time. So does anyone know what URL stands for? I'll answer your question also, Castile, in a second. No, this is URI. This is not URL. Come on, someone look it up and let me know. I believe it's locator. Define URL. Come on. Yeah, so it's Uniform Resource Locator, and this is identifier. So slightly different, and they are pretty similar in their layout and look, but URI is usually associated with what the heck? This is not. URI is usually associated with a file directory. So where exactly something is. So if you load up your file directory, your path usually can be referred to at times as a URI. So a URL typically will be referred to as like the first portion and the last portion. So the slash moving forward. So your subdirectories will be the URI, because that's where you're going into exactly to get whatever items you need to. You're specifying further down in the quote-unquote directory where you want to get this data and where that data is located. In regards to protocols versus API, the API I wrote still used HTTP. Yes. So if you are serving an entire web application across your REST API, it is not an API. An API is not is not a full-blown application. An API is simply some data that's useful that you queried, you need to get in order to continue programming your application out. Now, you could use HTML just like you could use XML to serve up the data, but if you're using HTML, you might as well use XML, because XML is structurized and it's going to be easier to parse through than HTML tags. But typically, for moving forward, you will always do it in JSON, because JSON is the industry standard. So just about every REST API you ever touch, I'm trying to think of one that uses XML still, and I can't right now, but it will always use JSON. So let's get a real world example here. Hold on. Is it possible to review and point out the mistakes that were made during the... Yes, we can go over the assignments here in a second. We can first review this, and then we'll go over the assignments. So I'll tell you right now, for the assignments, first thing is, if you are logging in a user, you are going to log them in by having a REST API that will take in creds and will return the user session ID, or some type of user session token or a JWT that you then, as the dev, will grab and use that for further authentication. You do not have an actual site that people will log into. But over the next week, with your guys' assignments, you do not need to worry about tokens. If you are going to do tokens, just use the JWT token. It's easiest to get up and running. If you don't know what JWT is, we'll go ahead and look it up here. So here's JWT. It's a token. It's industry standard. Auth0 uses it for all of their resources. They're the ones that maintain this. And it's basically a way of encoding data, including the algorithm that was used, which includes the type of hash that was used, which was 256 on this one. your data payload, which is public, by the way, and then your signature. Now, if you do a secret base encoding, it should also encode. No, I can't remember. I think there's a way to also encode the payload data, but by default it is public because it does not matter. When you're using an API, typically it does not matter to a certain extent what the data is coming across. It also will be already encrypted in your HTTPS packets. So having it encrypted also in the tokens, which I know you can do that, will be doubly encrypted because now someone has to break the HTTPS that you're using, and then they'll have to break the JWT token on top of that. But the only time super sensitive information should be sent across the wire would be on initial login, and after that you should never ever be sending sensitive information across the wire again. You should only be using the token, and the token will have a verified signature to it, which is typically some type of session that's going on that has a timeout plus an encoding with their password, sometimes username. It's honestly up to you on how you want to generate the signature, but the signature is hash based. So if you guys aren't aware what a hash is a one-way function, which means it's a one-way street. If you put data into a hash, you can never get the data out of it. So if we go to SHA-256 encryption, so any data I input in here, so SHA-256 will always be a fixed length string of whatever this size is. And there's no way to extract the data out. So once I add some data in here, there is absolutely no way to figure out what this data is by looking at this string at all. This is the quintessential cornerstone for blockchain technology also, is just the hash function. Hash functions have been around pretty much since the beginning of the internet to secure passwords. Now, hash functions, you'll see there are a lot of them. There are constantly new ones coming out because hash functions can be resource intensive, and so they only use hash functions in the wild, aka on the internet, that are good enough for the internet right now, which means that 256 might not be good enough for the internet in 10 years from now. Why? Because you might be able to crack things because user hardware is that powerful in 10 years from now. So I said that this hash you cannot extract data from. You can't. It's a one-way street. You can technically make the same hash. It's possible, very hard, but you can technically generate this exact same hash for this data with some random other data set. There is slight overlap with the SHA functions, but it's like, one in a gazillion. It's a very large number. The only way to extract or try to figure out what this data is you need to basically brute force or use things, pre-compiled lists of calculations, also known as rainbow tables, to figure out what this hash is. Basically, if none of that really makes too much sense to you, it's very difficult and you have to manually guess what this is. So you will manually have to guess every single item in here slowly over any given time. Kind of what, going back to blockchain and crypto, that's basically what crypto does when you're mining, is you have a data payload and you need to find a specific hash, and you're going to be mining and brute forcing and trying every single calculation till the hashes match your desired hash output. If you are more curious on that, next time that the crypto courses are being held, I recommend you sit in on those because they're very informative. All right, Let's get an example of a real world REST API. So there's this little game. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but very small indie company called Riot Games. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They have this game called League of Legends, and I guess another one called Valorant. I don't think anyone really plays them. I'm kind of hipster in that point. I'm just kidding, obviously. Riot Games has a REST API that you can query and use to get information about their games. And this is how services like, I don't know, op.gg, if you're playing, League, or do they support Valorant, or any of those other services that you might have used in regards to your games for tracking scores, KDAs, blah, blah, blah. This is what they will typically use. Now, this one's specific for Riot Games, but depending on what game you're doing, they'll usually have a REST API associated to them. Come on. Okay, this is the wrong account. Not sign up now. All right, so this is the portal for it. Usually with an API, if you're going to mess with an API, usually you'll be issued a token prior to accessing the API. So right here, this is my token. Right now it's expired, so we're going to need to generate a new token. So just generated a new token, and this one expires in 24 hours from now. Can you guys read this, or do you need me to zoom in a little bit? Okay, so this token, if I show it, is just a random blob of letters, characters, X, Y, Z, and this holds information about my current session. Sometimes it will hold when my token is supposed to expire. Sometimes it will just be some type of index that is looked up on a database, and that database will store the information of what I'm allowed to access and how long I can access that data for. It's totally up to you on how you want to develop it. Nothing is set in stone. That's the thing about programming, is there are more proper ways to do things, but there is not a proper way to go about doing things when programming. So don't get obsessed with being the most perfect or doing it the most elite or high-end way, because there is none. There's absolutely no proper or most high-end way to do most things. There's just a more proper way for certain situations, but you can do anything you want. So if we go over here to the APIs, we'll see right here all of the different things we can query in their API. So if we want stuff in regards to League of Legends, this is version 4 of their API. And if we look here, we'll go to one that doesn't require, there we go. We'll go to this one, I think. I can't remember. I think this one glitches out. We'll go ahead and go to this one, and we'll see. So if you look right here, you can see what the endpoint is. So to get access to these, so for account information, you have 3 different items you can do. They're all GET requests, which are a certain type of HTTP request. So these are all GET requests. So if you want this data, you must perform a GET request. If we haven't gone over already, HTTP requests types. There are a bunch of HTTP request types, and there are usually common associated, here we go. There are usually common associated tasks with each one of them, but to be honest, nothing holds you to using them the proper way. You could use GET for every single thing you ever do, period. And never touch post put delete, or any of these other items. You could literally use get the whole time. Typically, these other items like delete are going to be for deleting stop records or doing some type of delete function, but nothing's stopping you from using get to delete items in your database or something like that. It's just a more proper way to use delete if you are deleting something, but there's absolutely nothing holding you to using delete in your backend code. You can do whatever the hell you want. So in here, you can see where we need to go in order to access this resource. And then at the very end, you'll see this curly brace item. This means that we need to add that item ourselves. So this is looking for a player UUID. And this one is looking for the game name and tagline. And this is looking for more information. But we'll just go ahead and ping this one since this one doesn't require any type of resource for me. So it should work off the bat. So hold on. I'm going to... Okay, this one is not... there is a different version of it. I always run into this issue every time I load up this stupid site. We'll go ahead and go to Summoner. There we go. Is this cannot execute, this APN is not available? Of course it's not. Where's the champion rotations? Here we go. That's what I usually go to. So if we want to view the champion rotations, we can go here. I'm just trying to find one which doesn't require me entering data because I don't know any data off the top of my head right now. So if we scroll down to the bottom here, we can go and execute this request, and bam. We can see that right here, this is the response we got. So after doing this query, we got a response. This response is in JSON. This JSON has three items in it. 2 are arrays, 1 is an integer value. The first array is for all the current free champions that are available, which are just referred to by their ID. So if you want more information on them, you'll need to plug in their ID in some of these other API endpoints. Now these ones are additional free champs for new players, and those new players are defined by anyone being level 10 or lower. So this is a way for you to mess with and get data from League of Legends, and you can see, you know, what is going on, what's the free champions. Now, if we look up here and go back to the top, we have these data points which got returned to us. So this is a nice API, and this is not always the case because a lot of developers do not document or comment their code. For the love of God, document everything you do. We are judging you guys based off of what you're documenting and not. We will be discussing documentation probably towards the end of the month and going over proper documentation practices. You do not need to auto-generate sites like this. Sites like this that we're looking at right now will automatically auto-generate from your code if you document correctly. There are plenty of tools for building out automatic API, SDK, whatever you want, documentation from your code with a simple function call that will be a fully functional website. You just need to make sure you're adding comments in your code in the correct place in order to get these to generate. So as you can see here, we have 2 lists, and these lists are full of ints, and then we have one item that is just a single int. So this is what we should be expecting, and this is what we can program around when we're querying this API. Now, there are response codes that you can get besides the typical 200. So 200 is a success, and if you do not get a success, they're telling you these are the codes, these are different codes you could get, and these codes could mean different possible things. These HTTP codes, there is a general consensus on the internet of what each one of these codes should be associated with. But technically, you as the developer can make these codes mean whatever the hell you want. You do not have to conform by the typical code status. It is not recommended for you to do it. It's not very proper for you to do it because it's well established that 404 is a not found error. You could change that though. There's nothing holding you back from changing this to be the success message instead. So this just gives you some insight. But right here is some of the parameters you can change. So you could query on different servers. We're going to keep it at NA1. And here is the endpoint we hit. This is the URL that we requested our data from. This is the API endpoint, the REST API endpoint. So if we go here, we can visit just like a normal web address. You can also query it. I highly recommend you guys install Postman. If you do not have Postman already installed, for the love of God, download and install Postman. It is the easiest way to do development and debugging of your REST endpoints. Now, I'm pretty sure Postman is no longer installed on my computer since I did my reset, so I'm going to go ahead and install this also. Install this application. I'll give you guys a run through here in a little bit once it's done installing on how to use it to test your APIs. So let's go ahead, scroll in a little bit so you guys can see this. We got our data, JSON data. It's a status and it says we're unauthorized code 401. Also, the status code, you don't need to pull the status code out of the JSON. It will be attached to your HTTP header. So if we go in here somewhere, network, let me refresh since I didn't log it. If we click on the actual network connection down here and look at the details, in the actual HTTP header, the status code will be mimicked on the JSON status code. So it's best if you just check the HTTP header status code. It's going to be faster, and there should be automatic things in whatever library you're using in order to check this first. Honestly, pray to God that there isn't mismatch. If there are mismatches, so this said 404 and this said 401, I would typically default to what's in the header here and not what's in the payload that you're observing. But that sometimes happens because devs are lazy, dumb, and stupid, but doesn't break the application. It just confuses the end user. So I got a question here. So the request is JSON 2, but how does it get attached to the GET? Yes, the request can be JSON also. If you need to supply additional information, you can do it via, what do you call it? You can do it via JSON. So typically, if we look here, this is our typical default request header. This is pretty typical for any query of data. You can see here is our API token, which we're sending across in the header. If you are sending data in a GET request, it will be sent in the header. So if you are sending JSON data, you won't really send it in the header, but you'll send it in the body. But you can add data to the header. So you can add your tokens to the header if you want. Variables in the header are completely up to you. They are just like variables in normal programming. They can handle any type of data, and you can have as many of them as you want, and you can customly name them. So in the header is typically how you'll see them, but you could do also a query param. A query param will add them instead to the URL. So before, when we visited this, we didn't pass our creds, so we got, hey, we got the fuck off message. It said, hey, fuck off, you're not supposed to be here. But if we include our token in the header here, which we do, now it's like, oh, okay, you're legit, you can get access to it. And now you can see we got access to this data. Any questions with that? Do you recommend using Postman over the Python request library? For testing and debugging, yes, 100%. For building stuff out, no, Postman's just for testing, not for building. Well, arguably for building because it's helping you test your stuff. How bad is it to pass the data in the URL? Not bad at all. You can pass in the URL, you can pass it in the header, does not matter. They are both as visible and apparent to the end user. It does not matter at all. The only downside for the URL is spaces and other special characters will be replaced with the %20 and other replacement items that are required. So if you don't want to deal with translating that back to its original text, you might want to send it in the header. But besides that, does not matter. They are both visible equally the same to the end user or anyone that might be like sniffing your network if it's sent as HTTP. If it's sent as HTTPS, it's all encrypted when going traversal across the network. Snow said passing API tokens in URL params is insecure and should use headers because only the server can read headers. Okay, I'm gonna let you guys know right now. Snow is not a cybersecurity expert. He has no knowledge of cybersecurity, so that is incorrect. The headers and the URL are both going to be equally as transparent. Now, what he is partially correct on is when you make the request. No, Taylor, is the header even ever encrypted, or is it just the? No, that is a part. Taylor, chime in here real quick. We're gonna have to load up Wireshark real quick. We can easily see this by loading up Wireshark.
Yeah, so I mean the issue is either way it has to transmit network. Now if you are using SSL, it will be wrapped anyways. So like that's not the concern. The concern with putting things at a higher level in the browser is the browser will store it like in the cache and stuff like that, and potentially have leakage for people like get hit with like cross-site scripting and stuff like that.
So let's go ahead and take a look at some data here real quick. So let's see if we can capture in Wireshark our actual HTTP request. Oh god, filters. Can I filter off HTTP? Thank god. Let's do that. And I think I have to specify. God, what is it called? Taylor, it's not HTTPS. Is it TLS? No. Can I just specify it? Taylor, help me out. How do we do a port filter on 443?
So you have to specify the protocol and to TCP.port.
Gotcha. Okay, so oh, here we go. TCP.
Yeah.
Oh god, TCP. God, I'm messing this up. TCP, and let's go ahead and get 443. And we'll go ahead and do a refresh and then stop. All right. So we should have our packet in here, and we can see if it's actually, what parts of it are actually encrypted. So I am going to assume, I guess we can just ask Google or the terminal real quick what the IP is for Riot Games. So we'll go ahead and ping this URL. And I don't want to do HTTPS. All right, 104. So let's see if we can quickly find 104 in here. And here we go, 104. I don't know why this one aired out. Okay, well, we'll just click on another one of these items and look in them here. So as you can see, everything inside of the packet for your data that's going across is completely encrypted. This includes everything, including what is, what do you call it, in your URL. So there's absolutely nothing that's being revealed here, and the reason for that is your data traversing across the internet. This destination does not matter. The computers do not use this. This is something. Your URL is for something after you go to the server. So the only communication you have between you and the server is going to be your IP addresses and ports. Everything else that's going to be encrypted is going to be like anything inside of your TCP is going to be 100% encrypted. So you can see here all the data is encrypted. You can't view, this is web traffic. You can't view any of this web traffic at all. All of it is encrypted. There we go. All of this is encrypted. So you can see here, here's the packet. All of it is encrypted, including the URL. None of it is going to be exposed. So it does not matter if you have it in the header or if you have it in the URL. It's always going to be hidden. Make sense? Taylor, is there anything you want to add in here?
Yeah, just I do agree with Snow a little bit. Like, you don't want to be putting it in the URL. It's a bad practice. It leaks data in places that you don't need it necessarily, but it does fully function. And modern day web development is pretty secure.
Yes.
Like, just generically speaking.
Yeah. It could be argued that it's more proper to add it to the headers because it is more easily hidden from amateurs, because amateurs don't know what headers are typically. They're looking here. But at the end of the day, if you do one or the other, it doesn't matter. The data that you should be sending across the network should always be the token. There's only one time when you're not going to be sending the token across the network. Besides that, all the other data you get, it shouldn't matter, and it's going to be encrypted by HTTP, even though by HTTPS. Let me asterisk that. So you don't need to worry unless you want to doubly encrypt stuff. Let me see. Were there any more questions? How bad is it to we already asked that. Given the scenario, was a Trojan JavaScript file that a web host included in their front-end JavaScript can access the URL but not headers. I don't know how true that is. I would like to say that is untrue, because anything that you can see in your browser, you can access with JavaScript. So if there's stuff being sent across here, you can access that with JavaScript. There's also plugins that you can get for viewing your requests, and I'm pretty sure most of them, you can get them for Chrome, and I'm pretty sure most of them are built in JavaScript, and you can intercept that data. Regardless, does not matter. If you have a piece of malware in a different tab that can look at data in other tabs, you have a bigger issue at hand. You have a bigger issue at hand because that means Chrome is being exploited, because Chrome isolates every tab within its own sandbox environment. That's why it takes up so much freaking RAM. And Edge does the same thing because Edge is Chrome. Basically, every browser you use is Chrome except for Firefox and Safari. Basically, all other browsers that you'll utilize are all Chrome-based, or Chromium, I should say. And every browser I know, including... actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know about Firefox, but Chrome tabs are sandbox. That's why it eats up so much RAM. And you are generally secure, and JavaScript that hops tab to tab to read other sessions that are going on is that's a major exploit, and you should keep those in mind, but you should be worried about exploits on your own services and not exploits from other random, like, lower level stuff. Like, for example, if you're deving in a game, you're not deving a game and trying to patch exploits to the Windows operating system. That's not the point of you deving the game. You should be making sure any exploits within your game scope is exploited. And then if something major happens down the road, sure, you might keep that in mind. But when you're deving from scratch, don't worry about the underlying everything. Just know what your upper and lower bounds are and stay within that, and make sure you protect it as much as possible in there, because that's all that really matters. Any questions about that before we move forward? All right. So let's see here. Postman. Postman is awesome. We use Postman. When you load up Postman, it will kind of look like this. And you can make these things called collections. I, to be honest, have not messed with these other tabs before. Well, I guess history. But collections is what I've messed with the most. I am not a Postman. I wouldn't call myself a Postman pro, but I am a Postman user, and I know pretty much 90% of the stuff you'll ever have to use Postman for. So if we create a new collection, we name this collection, let's say we're a dev at Riot Games and we want to test our API endpoints. So we can do Riot API test. So this is us for testing our API endpoints. So here we can add our auth token if we have one, which is an API key. So this we're going to add to the header. We could add it to the query params if we wanted, which is what we're doing in the URL, but we'll just keep it to the default header. And we'll go ahead and we'll just grab our API token. We'll paste it in here, and we need to figure out what the key name for it is, which if we go back over here, we can see that it is called, let's change it back to header param, it is called the X Riot token. So we're going to grab that, and bam. Now, anytime we want to do queries to the API, Riot REST API endpoints, this will be automatically filled out for us. So let's go in here and let's add a request, and we'll name this. We'll say this is champion rotation. So champ rotation. Can I zoom in here? No. Can you guys see this fine? Oh, here we go. I can zoom in a little bit. So in here, we can specify what type of request it is. So we'll just keep it at a get. And then we're going to grab the URL, post it. So this is the champ rotation, and we don't need to fill out any additional data. So now if we can double check our headers in here, and you can see that it looks like our token from here is not being passed down. So we'll know in a second when we click on send. We'll see that we got a response code of unauthorized. So our header from up above from the parent here is not being brought down. So we need to go ahead and make sure that is. So if we go in here, and there should be a setting somewhere, or maybe it's up here on. Oh, I think I need to run. No, is it? Save. There we go. I had to save it. Sorry. So you had to click on the save button for it to get applied. So now that it's applied, you can see it right here. It's like in a grayed out box because it means it's coming from a parent item. So now instead of getting unauthorized, if we resend this, we should get the data that we were looking for. So by default, it's in pretty. We can look at it raw or do a preview. So if it was HTML data, you could do a preview, and there's some other items. And you can also see like cookies that were passed along, what was in the header, and other various testing items you want. You could additionally pass data in the body. So this is by none. You could do form data, the form URL encoded data. You could do raw, binary, GraphQL, or JSON. That's usually what I'll have. So yes, you can pass data in a GET request in the body with JSON data. All right, any questions on that? I highly recommend Postman because you can build all these out. So if you have a bunch of, you can also add these guys in folders. So if we wanted to mimic champion rotation. So if we wanted to really mimic, let's say if we were really a dev at Riot Games, each one of these guys would be folders. So we would call this folder our champion v3. So this is us hitting the v3 API. We can put our GET request inside of this folder. And then we can then continue adding more items here if we want. So we could click on new and add another HTTP request, and we can call, you know, this post, and, you know, build out a whole entire thing. And we can do, like you see up here, you can do automatic running of every query in your API collection. And if you have tests built out, you can, it will tell you like how many of them succeeded correctly according to the test that you wrote out, and it will tell you if your API is functioning like normal or not, or XYZ. But that's more on the production side of stuff. For just doing some quick deving, you don't have to go that far. But it's very easy, and it's way more pleasant of an experience than having to use Chrome. You could use Chrome or web browser for querying all these and making sure everything is testing correctly, but it's so much more convenient to be able to save your tokens and pass cookies and stuff like that in here, because it's meant for helping you save all that. Any questions with Postman? No questions? All right.
I just want to chime in here for 1 second quick on Postman. So Postman is not a crutch. Like, developers of all walks of life use it. Like, Snow is a very avid API designer and, like, does a lot with APIs, and he still uses Postman to test out his own code to make sure that you're getting the proper response that's, you know, formatted correctly in a timely manner, you know, with all the right structure built out, the right headers, the right token, you know, make sure everything's functioning properly. So, like, don't ever hesitate to just hit your own stuff with it, even if you're designing it.
Yes. Use tools that help you dev faster and better. Do not be a weirdo who thinks they need to manually do everything and run every command line and do everything from scratch and XYZ. No, fuck you. You're not going to make it anywhere in this goddamn modern world if you're not using modern tools and techniques, because you're never going to dev fast enough. The dev world is all about shitting stuff out fast and quick, and fast and quick does not mean that it's fully functional or the V1 product you wanted. Fast and quick means you made it, it works, it's secure enough, and it's out there and it's working. Just dev. Do not take on difficulties just because you think it's cool. That's awesome. You're not going to get a job for being cool. You're going to get a job for being productive. So be productive. A lot of people on this server are not actual devs in the world, in the actual world. So when they are talking about how they only trust, I don't know, fucking Emac, because that's all they'll use, and Emac is just superior and they do everything by hand, like there's some type of special artisan that, you know, takes care of every little bit in their code. Like, no, fuck you. Like, obviously you're fucking worthless because you can't dev fast enough. Use the tools that you have at hand and use them to produce results. So we'll take a look at another API endpoint. So we'll go to OpenAI. So OpenAI is, if you guys aren't tracking, is an AI system, and they have GPT-3, and they also have Dolly that they produce, and a bunch of other AI systems that are super duper cool and good. So if we log in here, we can get access to their backend API system. So in here, they have examples that you can run through and a playground you can mess with for getting used to the API. But when you actually want to mess with the API, you can then, let's go ahead and see, like, what is your favorite color? And we can go ahead and just click on a run for that. And the AI is going to tell me its favorite color is blue. All right, now you guys know that OpenAI's favorite color is blue. Oh my God, it's sentient. Let's write a Medium article and get fired from our Google job now. That was probably one of the most ridiculous things I've ever read in my life. So now you want to implement this right now in your application. You have to use their API in order to do that. So if we go over here and view the code, we can use this code here, which is awesome. So this is for Python. We could use like Node.js or curl. So we'll go over the curl example here in a second. But essentially, a lot of good and well-known packages or people that have a lot of extra time on their hands will not just produce the API for you, but they'll also produce a native language wrapper for that API. So if we view this and go to Python, you'll see that we just need to supply our API token and then some parameters, and it will do all the automatic requests for us. Now, this is great. All that's happening on the back end is they're handling the pinging of the service, passing of the token, and getting of the data for us. That's all that's happening at the end. So if you're programming in C or C++, this is not going to work for you. You need to basically implement this from scratch because they don't have a first-party library. So you'll have to go over here to like the curl and kind of reverse engineer what's going on here. So this is a GET request, and this is their API endpoint, and they have a bearer that requires the token, and then you pass in these items, which are, it's all JSON data in the GET request. So we can kind of build this back out. So if we want to make a new collection, this is going to be our OpenAI API collection, API, and we require a bearer token here. So we'll just go and click on bearer token. This is the great part about Postman, is it automatically handles all of this for you. We just need to get our token. So let's go ahead and check out my API keys. And great, we got a key here. I'll go ahead and copy it. We'll go ahead and go back here. I'm going to paste that. So my token's in here, and now I'm going to save so it gets propagated down to any additional items we make. So let's go ahead in here and make a new GET requests. And our GET request needs to be to this endpoint. So if we view this endpoint right now, you'll see that we'll get an error message. This doesn't pass in the code, which is honestly normal. It's kind of weird that Riot Games put in the code also in the JSON. That's typically not normal. When you look at the error code, you should be looking at it from the HTTP header. So if we look here, we got a 401 error, and they gave us a nice error message saying like, what's going wrong? We didn't supply our API token, so we need to do that. So we already put our bearer token in here. Now we just need to make sure this is all good. So we need to pass in JSON data. We already did the bearer token. We need to specify the data that we want. So TAC H is the headers. So if we look in our, go ahead and, whoops. This is a new GET request, right? Let me go ahead and make a new one. Paste, save it in OpenAI endpoint. Let's rename this to completions. All right, so we got this in here right now. So we're all good. It should actually just work if we press send. We should get a different type of error, basically saying that we need to send it data, which this is good. It means we are fully authenticated. We didn't get the 401 error like last time. We got a different error this time. We got a 400 error, which is a bad request, which makes sense because we didn't pass in the data correctly. So in our GET request, we'll go over to the body, and like it said over here, we need to pass in JSON data, and right here /d or tag D is the data. So that's the data we need to pass in. So we'll go over here, and I usually just click on raw for this to show up, and then I'll click on JSON data, and then we'll go ahead and just copy this JSON data from here. We'll pass it in here, and there we go. Now if we click on send, we'll get our result, or maybe not. Now this is interesting. Let's go ahead and check our headers, which it is saying JSON. Let's go check these. Authorization bearer token, that's being passed in correctly. Come on. You must provide a model parameter. Model parameter. Thought we grabbed everything. Why you gotta do this to me? This looks correct. Let's go and view the JSON. Make sure this is good. Go back to the curl request. Huh. Interesting. So I'm not quite sure why this one is not working, but regardless, this is the point. The point is, this is how you would then interact with it. So you would do your testing on here, and once you are solid, you're getting the results that you want, then you can translate this to another language, whether that's C, C#, Lua, whatever. You can now build it off with, but you can build it by integrating what you have here rather easily, and you don't have to run a bunch of programming tests to figure out if things are running correctly. Makes sense? Are there any questions in regards to that? I see Akrama's typing, so we're just going to wait for that. What cases do we send JSON in a GET request? Whatever cases that are required in order to interact with the API endpoint. So whoever's deving out the API endpoint or the REST API endpoint that you're messing with, they'll tell you what you need to do and what you need to pass in. So here, we don't need to pass anything in besides our token. If we're here, we need to pass in the queue right here. So it should say we need a queue. It's required in order to use this item. So we can, oh, look at that. It already has autofilling. So we'll go ahead, solo, and execute. and we just got some queue information about some random people's games. We got their summoner IDs, their actual summoner names, wins, losses, and stuff they're doing. Not all the time do you need to pass in stuff in the body. You only need to pass in stuff in the body when it specifies it. We did that here for the OpenAI one because they specify here that we have 2 header items that are required and then data. And the data will go typically in the body of your request. Does that answer your question? It's totally up to the dev on how they want to dev this out. So you as a dev can dev out your endpoint however you want. You can make it so it's all header params. You can make it so it's all URI items. You can make it so it's only stuff that gets passed in the body. It's 100% up to you. This is Wild West territory. There are things that you should do in order to make sure it's more proper and conformative of what is normal. But technically, if you want to be a fucking weirdo, you could do some weird shit. Now, I'm not condoning you to do weird shit because I would be pissed off if I had to use your endpoint because I'd be like, why is this person doing some weird shit? But you can do it. For the week 3 assignment, besides the REST API, is SQL mandatory. SQL is not mandatory in it, but it will make it easier. You can use local data. You could use a local JSON file. You could use various different items in order to track the data, but you must be tracking data somewhere. And your API endpoint should be messing with that data. Any other questions before we move on to deving it out ourselves? It can be literally about anything, about the HTTP, what the hell is HTTP, what is the difference between HTTPS, what is JSON, what is a header, what is GET, like literally it could be anything. Any questions right now? All right, let's load up VS Code. And now let's go ahead and look at, let's go ahead and pull up what I have here from earlier. Interns. Why am I blanking on this? Oh, here it is. All right. So, we'll go ahead and make a new directory. I think. No, we don't want that. I'm gonna go and make a new directory. All right, so let's go ahead and check out VS Code here. And in this directory, we'll go ahead and make a main.py. And we'll use Flask in order to make an API endpoint. You technically don't need to use Flask. Flask just makes it so easy. So Flask, let's go ahead. They have a great quick start, which is what we'll grab and use so we don't have to figure out from scratch. Bam. That was super easy to make an API endpoint. Now we'll go ahead and grab these PowerShell commands. I hate when they freaking add these at the beginning and they don't have a way to not easily select them. It just, why? Why are you doing this to me? So we'll go ahead. This needs to be main.py. That I spelled wrong. And now we can run this endpoint. Yeah, I can zoom in the editor. Flash application. Oh, what's going on here? Main.py and Flask run. Could not locate Flask application. Okay, well, why are you doing this to me? Let's do it this way. Main.py. There we go. All right, it's working now. All right, so our API endpoint is up and running. Flask by default is on port 5000. An API endpoint doesn't have to be on port 80. Most of the ones I've messed with, no, I'd say it's pretty 50-50 on the port. Usually, if they're using the same URL, it will be on a different port. If they have their own custom URL, like how Riot Games does here, do I have the tab for it? It will have, like, it will be an API dot the URL, and then it will be running on 80. But you don't have to run it on 80. Now, this is not what I would call a proper endpoint, because we're passing in HTML. You should be passing in JSON or XML. For the love of God, only pass in JSON. So in order to pass on JSON, we just simply make a dictionary in Python, and the newer versions of Flask will automatically realize it's a dictionary and make it into a JSON return, which is so beautiful, because before you had to mess with changing the header and a bunch of other stuff. So we'll go ahead and make a new variable here called x is equal to our dictionary, and we'll call this results, and our results gave us the number this, and then we'll go ahead and pass in results here, and bam, now we will have bam, 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 we will have, okay, let me rerun this. Bam, we will have our results. So this is a JSON response that we are getting, and if we inspect the elements and look at our network traffic in here, we can see that in here in the response header, we got a content type application JSON, because it's basically taking this Python dictionary and it's automatically making it into JSON that can be ingested, and it's telling us in the content type that it is, doing it in JSON. That's why in the browser changed from the white background to the black background, because now it's just data we can get. And now if we go over to Postman and we make a new collection, our cool app, we have no auth, and we'll go ahead and make a new request, get request, hello world request, and we'll paste this in here and click on send. You'll see we get our results here. Awesome. That is working 100%. And that's literally how easy it is to make a REST API endpoint in Python. This is a fully functional REST API endpoint, because you are visiting some type of URL and getting some type of JSON data back. And to make more endpoints, all we have to do is copy this, paste it. We need to change the function name, obviously, to something else. So we'll just name it that. And we can set up our own custom thing. So let's say we're connecting this to a database. And so our REST API is this guy is getting users. So get users. And then we'll do results. And this will be a result array of all the users, and user number 1 will be, I guess we should tab that down. And so user number 1 will be, we'll call them a very original user 1, and their name will be I don't know, Sedan. And of course Flask is being weird, so we'll go ahead and restart that. Oh, sorry, we're on the wrong endpoint. So now we have a brand new endpoint, and so we can either go through it to the browser and it's simply just /get users, and bam, we got our user here. Or we can go over to Postman, make a new request, and this will be get users, and we'll paste that in, and bam, we're now getting our users in here. Any questions on that? Can you zoom into the editor? Was this, I think that was old. So only the return needs to be JSON, whereas there can be many ways to call the API. Yes, the data should always be the same on the REST API endpoint. That's the thing about the REST endpoint, is it does not matter what language you use to program out this. It could be Python, Lua, C++, C#, C whatever, D#, F#, your mama, like it does not matter. You can program this in any language. And the end user, aka me, it shouldn't matter to me either. For example, if I go to Riot Games REST API endpoint, I have no clue what they programmed their REST API endpoint in. It could be Python, it could be C, it could be any other various language. It doesn't matter. All that matters is we're getting data in a standardized format for us to use in any application we're building off the bat. And you know, we don't have to do anything special here. Any questions on that before I answer probably the most important and biggest question that you guys should be asking? Any questions? All right. The biggest question that you guys should be asking is, what's the point? Why? Like, why are we doing it this way? Why don't we just access, instead of building our own REST API endpoint, why don't we just access the data like we've always done, like query the database, get the data back, you know, do something with it, XYZ, right? Yeah? That typically how you guys do it? See, 8F's typing, so we'll wait. And now Castile's typing. He's getting there also. Is this the same as set and get class methods? No. No. This is not like a getter or setter. This is a decorator, which is a function that wraps around another function in order to perform something. And then this is just a function that's inside of it. And this can be literally like named whatever you want. It doesn't matter because this is the way people access that resource. I mean, in terms of limiting functionality. Yes, you are going to basically make getters and setters. So these are all getters because you can only get data from these, but you could also collect data, and I guess you could call that a setter. And then you could also delete data, insert data, modify data. You can do all those various items and tasks. Each one will be on its own endpoint. Yes, it's all about uniformity. So no matter where you're getting this data, or how you're collecting it, or what languages you're using, the data will always be the same, and you always collect it the same, and you always parse it the same. It does not matter. So it's very language agnostic in that sense. Because if you were sending data as binary across, well, you're going to run into issues there, especially if someone didn't change the Indianness properly, and different languages handle binary data slightly differently, and it can be a hassle. But you can do binary data in your JSON, or just send over binary data if you want. But as long as you keep everything else the same, like where you go to get that data, that's fine also. Can someone make a Discord bot that parse whether my program is up to date? Yes. Can someone make a Discord bot that parses? I'm not quite sure what the question is referring to. But on the topic of Discord API. If you want to mess with Discord API, all of their API is REST endpoints. So if you want to go over here and mess with the guild stuff, these are all items at the REST endpoint that you can mess with and change and so forth. And here's the data you would be sending, and they should have the endpoint somewhere. Here we go. Here's the endpoint /guilds and then the guild ID. Or if you want to, get a user, get current user. There you go. What is me? So getting another user's ID. You can pass in data to get various different things if you want. This is very industry standard, and it tells you whether it's a GET request. So these are all GET requests. This is delete request. So when someone's leaving the guild, you can do a delete. Like I said, you can technically do any type of prior. This could be a GET request too, but it's more proper to do something like a delete because you're deleting them. They're leaving the guild, so you're deleting them from that record. So it just logically, when you're reading it, it just makes more sense. I was retelling my experience with getting API, not asking a question. I still use XML for my REST API. Yeah, so I highly deter from using XML because it's not used anymore because it adds a lot of extra data to your packets, which is a number one minus. And number two, there's not very many good XML parser libraries out there anymore because everyone's using JSON. So whenever you're looking up stuff for user support, you're going to get a lot more JSON support related items than you are XML. But you could send in XML also. You'll just need to, I don't know how to send XML automatically here unless I set the content header, which I'll have to figure it out. If you guys aren't aware what XML is, it's literally like HTML, except everything's custom. So if we look at an image here, here is XML. It looks pretty much like HTML, but it's not HTML. So every single one of these items, the tags are going to be like custom. This isn't really... This is like an XML setup file. This isn't really what you would send over the network. This would be something similar or more similar to what you send over the network. So you would be sending this. But as you can see, there's a lot more information here in the sense that there's all these tags, and the tags take up more network space, which means now it's a lot more data you need to transfer, which means things could go slower, especially for people that have slow internet connections, or maybe you're getting a lot of data at once. This is going to be very heavy on your network. All right, so the biggest reason why this is important is let's bring up good old Paint here so I can torture you guys with some of my drawings real quick. So let's say you have let me go ahead and make this bigger. So let's say you have a database. So you have a database and you have an application. Let's say it's like a website or a program, something that's on the client's computer. So here's the client's computer. It does not matter if it's a web page or if it's an actual compiled program. It's just something that's on the client's computer. Now, what a lot of beginner devs will do is they'll build their web page or their compiled application. They'll give it to a client, but now they'll have it so the client directly can access the database. Well, this is bad for 1,000 different reasons. Reason number one is it means that you've put the creds for the database on the client's machine. So they have now the creds for your database. Oh, but you encrypted them or did XYZ. Doesn't matter. You just gave them access and the creds for free, which means now I can spend time easily breaking those creds and get access to it. That's not a fix. Anything that's encrypted can be decrypted, especially if you're given the raw data yourself. Also, maybe you're doing something special where you don't even have to decrypt things when you're sending it across. Well, that means I can now use your creds decrypted across the network to access the database directly. Additionally, I can access the database correctly, which means I can modify your website. I can modify your website with new custom code, whether that's in the website or the program, and now I can do things directly to your database, whether that's the intended things or the non-intended things, which is also an issue. Also, let's say that you just programmed it out like super beautifully, except there was one flaw in one little thing that you did where, users were filling out information box or something like that, and you're not doing proper filtering on that data, so they could do in SQL injection thing. Well, now they can ruin your database, but also if you want to update their website or their program, you need to push an update to them. Maybe they don't want an update. Maybe they're running a cache version of your site or something like that. There's no way to force this client to use your new updated patch program. It's just a goddamn shitstorm. Don't do this. This is what, 1 month programmer you will do, and that's fine. It's parts of the steps of learning because you're getting used to making your program and then accessing a database. But now you're entering into normal programmer world, the elite programmer world. This stuff, surprisingly, is still done in the quote-unquote elite programming world because there's a lot of dumb devs. But don't do this. What you do for now on is you do not ever directly communicate with the database with anything you give to the client. What you do is you set up a middleman, a REST endpoint. So here's a server and it's running your REST API. So now the proper communication channel is this stays on the server, never leaves the server. It is in your closed network where this database and the server might be in the same closed network. Your database is now no longer exposed to the open web. All ports connecting to your database are completely shut off, and no one is ever able to access your database from the open internet. The only thing that can access your database is your server running your REST API endpoint. And your REST API endpoint is exposed and can be accessed from the client. So you're no longer doing this. This is gone. You're going through the REST API endpoint which then gets data from the database. Now, the client doesn't need access to the database directly. They just need to either freely query what's on the server, or you have some type of login where tokens are given back to them that expire after a set amount of time. And during the time their tokens are valid, they can use the REST API endpoint. Is the client doing something malicious? Great. Cancel their tokens. Now they can no longer use the REST API endpoint. Block their IP address. They can no longer use the REST API endpoint. They're never getting access to the database. Was there a flaw in one of your endpoints? Let's say you were doing like a post like blog or something, and let's say you failed on your filtering on the client side, so they could, technically inject a SQL injection thing. That's fine, because you do client-side verification of your boxes, but you do not ever rely on client-side verification for anything. Client-side verification of data is purely for convenience of the client. It is never, ever, ever what you will use for actual verification of if the input forms are correct and valid. You will use your REST API endpoint for doing that. So it does not matter if there is something that's exploitable on the client for the input boxes because you're not doing filtering correctly. It does not matter, because you should be redoing that same filtering and verification on the server side before you even access the database. So there's two steps that are basically doing your verification. Technically, if you want to say fuck you client, like you don't get a very pleasant UX experience, you don't have to include any like verification of their data on the client side. Just tell them to ship everything off raw how it is to the server, and your REST API will filter through it and make sure it's valid or not. Oh, is this post blog table slightly exploitable? Fine. Make a patch, update the REST API endpoint on their server. Congratulations. Every client across the world has to use this server and this REST API endpoint, and now they're forced to use the most up-to-date new version of this, which means no more exploits. You patch in one place and it works everywhere for everyone. Does that make sense? Are there any questions in regards to this? Is this more work? Yes, it is more work. But guess what? Get over it. You can either be a shitty lazy dev, or you can be a good, slightly less lazy dev. All right? You're still a lazy dev at the end of the day, but don't be stupid lazy where you're doing dumb things. Take the right steps in order to ensure things are properly done and as secure as possible. This is, of course, in a situation where you are also paid for maintenance of their website/services. What do you mean exactly? Can you expand on that? Well, you make your clients a database for their service. Anytime you're dealing with something where you have access directly to the database, you need to make a REST API endpoint to capture that data before going to the database. But if you just make it and leave it, they should not own the DB. No, they should own, if you're doing freelance work and you're making this out for someone, they should own this and this and this, the client, the server, and the database. The database can be its own box that's running, or the database could be on the actual server itself. It doesn't matter whether they're separate or not. At the end of the day, no client like computer should ever be able to access the server. By client, I don't mean like clients like you're getting paid to build something for the client. No, client, I mean your web browser, the program that you built out. This, let's say this whole thing is what you were paid to develop. Terminology wise, client and server is in reference to the client device, program, whatever that's running on the user's end, and the server is always something that you have control of. When you're talking about actual like people, you'll refer to them as users, or you'll refer to them as customers. Can you run a DB on Docker and run the site on the machine? Yes, you can run both of these in Docker, which we'll show you here in a second. You can run the DB in Docker and the server in Docker as both their own unique containerized services, and both of those services are running directly on the same single server box. That is just fine. My God. Okay, lol. Yeah, I get it now. So only host machines can reach. Yes, that is a simple step to take in regards to security, is making it so no one from the outside world can ever access, because devs, when it comes to security, think it's kind of like a black box and you got to do it, but you don't know how, and there's like things you can randomly activate that will quote unquote make things secure. That is not the right way to go about it. You should actively figure out what is the best way to do it, and this will solve most of your use cases, because people are paranoid about, oh, are my passwords secure enough for my database XYZ. Well, now it matters, but it doesn't matter as much, because now to get access to the database, someone needs to exploit your server box first in order to get access to your database, and they have to exploit your REST API endpoint service, which is a pretty difficult endeavor within itself. But you should be always patching, because if you are using Flask and Flask has a directory traversal exploit that comes out for it, you're going to want to patch that like yesterday. If you guys don't know what a directory traversal attack is, it is pretty much exactly what the name explains it to be. You have some type of service. You have some type of service like this, and directory traversal attack will literally be someone in the URL bar will put a slash, and just like you do in Linux to CD back, they'll do a dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash. They'll just add a bunch of them in order to try to get to your root directory. And once they get to your root directory, then they'll try to get, I don't know, the boxes creds, which are usually in user slash shadow. And they'll do that and press enter. And a directory traversal attack will actually respond with either they'll straight up give you the creds, which also means they did permissions wrong on their box, or if they did permissions correctly, it will just show you sorry, this is not user, it's Etsy. Or they'll tell you that you can see the file, but you don't have the proper permissions to access the file, which is a bigger issue within itself. I bring it up because recently on one of my projects here, it was yelling at me because something that was, I think it's here, npm I will show up here. Yeah, it basically says I have a bunch of vulnerabilities right now, which just happened. And if we audit, you'll see that the critical one is a directory traversal attack right here, or a path traversal. They're the same thing. and it's for this moment. So anything that's on the live web that's using this right now, if they didn't patch, it's right now exploitable to this attack. Wait, is that not IFI, the path traversal thing? IFI? Can you LFI? LFI, vulnerability. Local file inclusion. Hacker use local. No, this is. Maybe there's overlap. I'll have to read the actual article. I'm just like skimming through it, but it's usually called a directory traversal or a path traversal. I've only seen it used in those proper technical like terms. LFI might be a broader thing because it's talking about trick to exposing or running files on the server, and LFI may lead to remote code execution or cross-site scripting. So it seems like LFI is the more broad item because directory traversal is simply just traversing directories. And I guess LFI is more of the execution, it looks like, because it's talking about execution of code or cross-site scripting, which is execution. So that's what I'm assuming right now. So are there questions on that right now? Before we go through the practical example. I saw you're typing Akrama. Are you good? Or are you still going to ask? So. Gracias. So while you're typing, I'm going to continue here to the practical example. Why does this keep doing this? Okay, let's make backend and a new folder called front end. So let's go ahead and make a new PowerShell. One will go to the back end and one will go to the front end. So the back end is already dev'd out. So npm, the audit npm command, these errors are in the main framework. That's what it looks like. It looks like it's something that I imported or something that I'm using. So something that I'm using is using, because I'm not, if we look here in the package.json, this is only using these items. So it's probably something in Bootstrap or the auto prefixer or React or something in here that's using one of these, which are exploitable at the moment. I haven't done enough research. So it looks right here, this guy depends on these guys, and this is dependent on Tailwind. So it looks like Tailwind is what's exploitable in it, which is fine because Tailwind is purely CSS, so it doesn't really matter as much. If it was React itself that was dependent on it and exploitable, it would be more of a concern. So that's the other thing, is just because something's yelling at you and says you're going to die, your computer's going to blow up, and you're going to lose all your users' information, doesn't typically mean you're in hot water or trouble. You got to look at also what's going on here. And this is all being used in Tailwind. And like I said, Tailwind is just simply CSS. The actual end user that I serve this site to, they don't get access to Tailwind. They just get access to what the CSS that Tailwind produces. So if this were to go live in production right now, I will be fine. That makes sense? All right. So this is not what I want either. Oops. VS Code. There we go. So we got our backend endpoint, and will Flask still work? Do I need to rerun the? Gosh darn it! Let me do it. Let me do the switch Rooney here. This will be the backend because this is where Flask. This is where the Flask creds are in, and then we'll go ahead and go to the front end on this guy. All right, so let's go ahead and show this in action. So we got our REST API endpoint right here, just chugging along. It's working. God, get out of here. I'm gonna freaking murder this thing. So in our front end, we'll go ahead and make a site. This site can be in literally anything you want. It could be, just straight up HTML, a React, Next, Django, Spring Boot, like whatever language, whatever library you want. It does not matter. For this case, since I've been cranking out stuff in Next.js, we're going to do Next.js. So let me look up Next.js quick start guide so I can figure out what these commands are. Again, as a dev, you don't need to memorize everything. Just for the love of God, know how to get what you need to get and call it good at the end of the day. And why are you not loading? All right, so let's go ahead and do this to create the React app. Any questions while this is loading up? So we'll modify the backend a little bit. So instead of get users, let's say we're making a blog site. So we're going to get blog posts. This naming scheme I'm using, you don't have to follow this. Just whatever naming, you can use any naming scheme you want, but whatever you use, make sure you're consistent. Consistency is key across everything. So we're going to do get blog posts, and in the results we're going to do like post 1, and here's my cool little text, and then we'll do a post 2. Well, I guess this would be the title of the post, so let's say no, we'll gosh, all right, we'll just do title and my first post, why pickles are yummy, and we'll do one more. Why REST APIs are overrated. I know what is best for you. There we go. So we got 3 blog posts we can get right now from this endpoint. So let's go ahead and take a look at our front end site. Let's go ahead and do npm run dev so we can start up our front end site, and it should auto open in a, knock on wood, maybe not, All right, doesn't look like it's auto opening. So let's close this guy. And let's go ahead and go to localhost, and this is on 3000. So here we go. We got our site. Let's go ahead and go to our index page here, and we'll keep the head. So we'll delete, no, the head we'll get rid of. We'll keep the main and the H1 in there. There we go. Let's get rid of this footer. All right. So we got a very basic web page right now that simply just outputs some text right here. We can go ahead and get rid of this link. There we go. It just outputs text. So what we'll do is we'll have it so every blog post we have, it will generate some new text here. So let's go ahead and steal code from a previous project, because that's what devs do. We are the most green, we are the most green people on earth. We were doing green stuff before it was cool. We were recycling, we were reducing, we were reusing like crazy before the mainstream world even thought it was a good idea to do it. So continue doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here, because this is for fetching some stuff from our backend API endpoint. So we'll go ahead and now switch over, and right here we'll go ahead and post that, except this API endpoint is called, what is it, get blog posts. Was it just singular? Let's see here. What have I done? This is running on 5000. Get blog posts. I think Flask wants me to restart it. Flask run. There we go. So here's our blog posts. We'll go ahead and copy this URL. We'll paste that URL right here. So now we're getting the blog posts. This is going to be res blog posts, posts and props, blog posts. And we got to pass that in right here. And then we're going to do a simple map. And I say simple, but I don't remember how to do it off the top of my head. So it's going to be in high scores list. There we go. Let's go ahead and grab this for loop. We'll go ahead and do that. Get out my face. All right, so in here, we're going to be creating a H1, and we're going to delete all of these. We're going to make it, there we go, H1. So on our blog posts, let's go ahead and print to the console if we actually got our blog posts. And let's do that beforehand. Let me comment this out. So right now we'll load up our site and we'll see if we're even getting our blog post from our API endpoint. So let me put that over here. Let me make sure blog post right there. So let's refresh, and if nothing's broken, which of course it is going to break because nothing ever works. Let's go ahead and refer back to what we have here. Get out of my face. Pages, my scores. What am I missing here? Looks fine to me. Oh, I'm missing the text here at the bottom. Export default and the name. Export default, and is this just home? Oh God, what have I done? Why are you doing this to me? Let's copy this and just do an undo. There we go. Things are back to normal. Let's go and paste this. Save, refresh. Return props. Why are you doing this to me? Come on, I just want to give a simple example. I think it's because the silly me. Whoops. Gosh darn it, I should just read the errors. Okay, sorry about that. All right, site working now. We are properly querying the database and we are getting that data and we are returning it here. If we do a console log, so let's go ahead and do a log of our blog posts. You can see we are now actively using this correctly. Come on, why are you doing this to me? But why? Okay. We're getting our data from, oh, it's called a res blog posts. Come on, you guys, got to help me out here with these spelling errors. All right, site is live. It is working. I swear it's not as complicated as it just looked me. I was just struggling really hard. So all we're doing is we got a basic web page here. If you're not familiar with Next, does not matter. All you need to know is this is our web page, which is printing this. And at the bottom, we have a function that is getting data from this endpoint. And this is just how you're waiting for the data. And once we get the data, we're passing it to our website. And right here, we're printing that data onto the console. And if we look right here in our console log, we have an object. And if we open it up, you can see we got our data from our blog posts. So we are interacting right now correctly with our backend database or our backend code or backend API, and we're accessing the data that we are allowed to access. This could be hooked up to, the backend could be hooked up to a database. We don't know. We don't care. It does not matter. It does not matter if it was just statically written out like what I just did and served to us, or if it was actively being queried from a database. All that matters is we got the data. And now that we have the data, we can now generate our website or our program. It does not matter. We're using a website as an example here, but it could be some type of program that runs in Windows or Linux. It could be whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is we got the data, and now that we have the data, and we can now mess with that, render that out as we see fit. So right here, we'll go ahead and render that out on the screen. So let's go ahead and just delete all of this stuff. And let's try this again. All right, now we're doing this. Every entry, index, and the value. We're not doing any stuff like that. We're not going to be logging, and we'll simply take the value, and our value is called title. There we go. Let's refresh this and see if it works. And it's freaking out. Import exports cannot be used. Where am I going wrong on this? This is where you're supposed to help me again. I think I'm missing key index. I'll explain cores here in a second. Let me just quickly finish this crap out. Let me put it up on this screen. All right, let me just get rid of this class name. Make sure that's not messing with it. Export get. Am I? Come on, why are you doing this to me? Syntax issue. Did I copy something over I didn't like? Oh, that would make sense. All right. Entries. Isn't this supposed to be a dot map? Okay, well, this is taking too goddamn long, and I'm quickly rushing through it, and it is not going well. Oh, this is supposed to be results. Dot. Results. Okay. Well, you guys get the point. If we just delete this and go back to the well-known, you get the point here. We should be able to just print res blog posts dot result, or maybe not. Okay, well, regardless, you guys get the point, which is that the data is coming in via the REST API endpoint only. We're getting it here in the console, and let me go and clear everything here and refresh. We're getting in the console, which means we can now mess with this data on our web page, and we can render things as needed, and we're not ever accessing anything directly. Questions there? Actually, give me like 2 seconds to use the bathroom. Formulate your questions while I'm gone. All right, I'm back. So you shouldn't get a CORS error if you are running everything on the same computer, because you're both using localhost, so you won't run into that issue. Where you might run into that issue is if you have it in a container or on a different server or box. Now, if you're using Flask, by default, if Flask is in development mode, and I'm putting an asterisk on this. Flask, when it's in development mode, let me go and close this front end. Should enable for you to connect with it from anywhere. It's only when you run it in production mode where it should really start applying cores. Do you have questions on that? If you are using Express as your middleware, you may have to then enable cores. I'm not using Express, so I don't know what the upper and lower bounds are. So you'll need to fix and set your cores. Does it make sense? So who here doesn't understand what cores is? Because that should naturally be your guys' next question. If I'm using terms you don't understand, ask questions around that, because if you don't ask the questions, then I'm assuming you understand what those items are. So cores is something that's added for, is it on the HTTPS level? Yeah, it's on the HTTP level. So cores is essentially what people can access from where. So by default, on some application, your cores will only allow items on the same domain as the running service in order to access it. So that's not really useful, because if you're running a public API like this stuff, you need anyone to be able to access it from anywhere. So you're going to need to set the cores in your application to either every specific place you want people to be able to access that data, or you can set it to basically asterisks and allow anyone to access that data. Yes, it's a way to stop malicious things from happening, because you can control who can actually get access to the data. So an example right here of cross-origin requests, a front-end JavaScript code served on domain A uses a REST API to get XML data from domain B. Well, I guess this is JSON data, but it's using the XML HTTP request. So pretty much what we're doing right now. Front-end site reaches out to back-end sites to get data. Now, you will be refused because you're going from this domain and you're trying to get data from this domain. You will be refused getting that data. You will be refused access from that data, because by default some places will only allow you to access that data if you are on the same domain or you're accessing it from the same domain. So in order to allow people from outside your domain to access your resources, you're going to need to modify your cores, and this is going to be different depending on what application you're using, but it's usually this. You're setting this to asterisks to allow for anyone from anywhere to access this data. So if you're using Express, set cores, we can just Google Express set cores, and in here we can see that app uses cores. So this is for enable all cores requests. So you just need to add this according to the doc right here, and this will allow anyone from anywhere to access your application. For enabling from a single route, you can do this, I guess. And then here's some more stuff for configuring cores. So this, if you want only a specific domain, then this will be for only a specific domain. Now, this we're showing Express because there's a question for Express, but this is also something that's in any item that you're going to be using. So Flask cores, if we Google that, you'll see here that this is how we enable cores on our application. This is how we can make it so we can accept origins from anywhere. And then this is how we can wrap. If we want everything to be accepted from anywhere, we can do this. Or if we want only certain endpoints to be accessed anywhere, we can do this. So why would you want only certain things over other things? I don't know. Maybe you're rendering some data onto your web page on the server side first, and it's very sensitive, so you'd never want anyone outside of your server environment to be able to access that type of data. And then some data is okay if people publicly access it, so you would enable that on just things that you want public. You do not have to have your API endpoint just purely public. You can mix it with private and public. Additionally, you'll see this term called middleware. So Express, I think, used the term middleware here. Express Core's middleware. Sometimes this API endpoint is referred to middleware. So if you see job postings that you're trying to apply for that ask for middleware experience, this is middleware experience. It's also called backend experience. Terms are kind of used interchangeably. There is kind of a defined line though, is front end is what users will get. Usually front end is associated with actual websites and not really client applications. There's middleware, which is purely the REST API you stand up. And then the REST API, depending on the architecture of your site or service that you're offering, that middleware will then port the data off to actual full-blown backend tasks that will do processing and maybe other various items on it. So it's kind of like in the middle, sandwich in the middle. Sometimes it's just straight up also your backend, but sometimes it's also not. It's just like the middle and there's more stuff in the backend. Does that make sense? What questions do you guys have? If you have no questions, we'll review some of the code that was submitted. Yeah, you can configure it per resource. It's totally up to you. I think so. Like I said, there's no proper way of doing things. There's just more proper. And to me, a more proper way of making something instead of well, I forget where the tab is, but instead of configuring some to be all and some to be like open, I think that's awfully messy. I would rather make two middleware applications, one for backend secret services only and another one for front-end services. Additionally, just because the examples that I've been giving have been with clients accessing the server through a REST API and that's how they like integrate with the database, doesn't mean it only has to be exclusive to the client. Big companies like Google, Amazon, whatever you want, it's OS REST API endpoints or some type of endpoint or service middleware that you interact with. You will never access the data exclusively. So what I mean by that is your server, so let's say this is your server, and inside of your internal network, why is this so laggy right now? There may be like a database, and there may be another REST API endpoint. So we'll call this REST. Your server in your network, so this is not exposed to the public at all. Your server may, in order to access data from the database, may be accessing a REST endpoint first in order to get access to the database, or maybe there's a file storage like S3 that you're using. It may use the REST endpoint first in order to access that. Why would you do something like this? Well, there's lots of reasons. One is the same thing on the client side is If there's an issue here on the REST endpoint front, you can just update this, and you don't need to update possibly monolithic code that's on your server. Additionally, it's abstraction. So maybe, if you're working on a larger team, maybe the backend team that's working on this server stuff don't need to know, or you don't want them to know, the exact structure of your database or your file storage or whatever in your backend services. Maybe you want to just have them be abstracted from that info, not give them access just to everything. Because imagine if you went to Amazon and first thing they did is spun you up on how all of their internal processes work, how all their internal services and databases are laid out. First of all, your head would explode because of how much information that is. And second of all, now you're a source of leakage. And if all the 10,000 devs at Amazon had that access to information, it's more likely it could be leaked out to the public and exploits could be made. So it's separation and also headache proof, because now you can just do a simple lookup, because they will have internal guides to their internal REST APIs when you work at these companies, and you don't need to worry about all of this jazz that's going on here or this jazz that's going on here. You just need to access the REST API endpoint internally to get whatever data or services you want. Something more practical may be for financial records. So let's say you are making some backend service, and like I said, this is purely not even accessing the internet. This is purely internal to your company or service only. You're on the backend team dealing with products. So when someone comes on your site and they want to add a new product, you're taking that product and you're adding it to some special database, whatever, with the price, some pictures, whatever. And you're maybe accessing it directly because you're the backend service. You can do that. Well, you're not doing payment processing. You're purely setting everything up besides payment processing. You're setting up the price, the photos, the description, XYZ. When someone wants to purchase an item, you're going to need to accept that card information and process that payment. Well, maybe there's another backend team that handles payments, and they have their own database, and they have their own architecture, and they interact directly with this. You will not access ever the payments database and get that information, because there's a clear separation of these teams, and one team shouldn't know all the stuff from the other team. Instead, what you'll do is internally with the payment people, they'll set up some type of middleware. This would be a REST API endpoint, and you will say, hey, when Bobby Joe buys this product, here's the product ID, and this is how much it costs. And then this API will do all the handling of the data, the credit card info, whatever, and do the processing and store it off securely. So you will never see that info. They will see it though. And vice versa. Payment people don't need to know the products, and they shouldn't be able to see like what products are available. But if for some reason they want to be able to get some products that you have, this team will make its own middleware, REST API endpoint, where they can then query and get data from. But this is an abstraction of what is actually going on in the database or your S3 buckets, or whoops, I spelled S3, or so forth. Does that make sense? You guys can ask questions. This is like big boy shit that you only get exposure to and you learn if you're in industry. They do not teach you this at college. If you are in college right now, you will never be taught this, because most likely your professors have been teaching for 20 plus years old and barely can comprehend how the internet works currently. So they will not give you real world examples of this stuff because they barely understand how this stuff works. Even that's assuming they even know that's what's going on. Yes. conceptually, as long as you understand it conceptually, you can execute on it. That's the most important part. The hands-on experience, all that helps you with is being able to stand this up quickly because you kind of understand what steps you need to run through. But conceptually, as long as you understand that there is some type of middleware, which is usually a REST endpoint, and you know you'll have some backend service, you can easily, program something out to be this middleman, program something out to be this backend, and move forward from there. You just need to know the concepts. Any questions on this and the concepts before we go into code? A code review, I should say. I think Adaf wanted a review of his code. Does anyone else want their code reviewed publicly? So we can shame you for all the things you did wrong publicly. Okay. So, let's see here. I don't think any of this is needed anymore. So let's go ahead and close out of this. Close out of this. Whose was this? This is not his. I think you sent that to us via Docker, or not Docker, GitHub. Give me 1 second to look at my GitHub real quick. Okay. So this is your code, correct? Adolf, this is what you want us to review? All right. So let's go ahead and clone this bad boy. That was the wrong one. You do not have... Okay, I guess we're going to do it this way. All right, so let's cd and do a git clone. And let's go ahead and go into to-do and launch this. All right, let's let the public shaming begin. All right, so you got your Docker file, which is building from a Node Alpine container. You're copying over your files. You're exposing port 5005, and you're doing an npm start. Sweet. So I should see you manually setting port 5005 in your code. So let's go ahead and go in your code. And what are we looking at here? What the hell is all this? Is this what I'm supposed to be looking at? Let's go ahead and run this Docker file. Docker build takt or dot takt to do. You son of a bitch. I'm gonna launch my Docker. Alright, let's go ahead and look at this when it's built as a container, and then we'll dive into the code. So I don't know why, but Docker, when I was trying to show you guys the first time, was not working on my main computer and was asking for the subsystem, Linux subsystem, and it was not, it just was geeking out. I did a restart on my computer, and for some reason, it just magically works now. It's still using the subsystem. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not questioning it. It's working. All right, so let's go ahead and build your container. And once it builds, it looks like we got a Docker Compose right here. So we'll go ahead and launch that. Do. Any other questions that you guys have while this is building? What does API Gateway do on AWS? It was one of your tasks you guys needed to research. I'd say ADAF is the more correct answer in the sense that it manages and can secure your API. You can hook it in to Lambda, but that's not its main functionality. Let's go ahead and we'll get back into that here in a second. Let me go ahead and do a Docker Compose. Gosh darn it, Docker Compose up. We won't do a tag D. All right, looks like it's working, and it was 5,005. So let's go ahead and do a local host 5,005 and see what that gets us. Connection refused. Looks like you have an error in here. 5,006. Oh, you're right. There we go. All right, so you have product here, and we can interact with it by adding new to-do items, saving, and it gets added to our to-do list, and we can delete items on here. Does it persist? No, it doesn't. So it's all temporary within the session, which is funny because the new items persist, but not the old items. And if we uncheck this, that doesn't persist either. Do I have to click this? No, that's the API endpoint. So, yeah, items saving are supposedly in the state. So if we look through your code here, so containers, task lists, this is the data that we're getting, and this is API endpoint data in its finest, because it's easiest for JavaScript devs, and honestly my assumption is I've never fact checked this or actually Googled or researched it, but I'm guessing the second reason why JSON data won over XML, first being it's just bigger in size, but second, JavaScript devs run the front end world, and JSON data just works immediately in JavaScript. There's no weird imports or formatting or anything you have to do, so it's just very convenient for those individuals. So if we look here, we can see that you are returning your data right here as some JSON, and you're adding a pre, which means that this isn't a proper endpoint. It's working like one, but first the telltale sign is that you have background colors and other stuff like that. Second telltale sign is you have HTML in here, and the third telltale sign is if you inspect and we go into the network, and we'll go ahead and refresh this, you'll see that we're getting a lot of stuff that's not important. We don't need JavaScript files when we're loading up the API. Also, since this is a looks like a React app, native React app, React apps by themselves by default don't actually render any data. So if we go to the view page source, you'll see that there's no data. None of your data is actually rendering out here at all. That's because React apps are purely client side only, which means none of your site happens or gets displayed or shown until the JavaScript runs. So if you had a website that had no JavaScript enabled and you were to try to load up your website, all you're going to see is this. If you tried to curl your website right now, you'll only get this output on every single page, because that's one of the big flaws of React out of the box. So usually React is used in conjunction with something else in order to overcome those challenges. So this is not, it's functioning like how a REST API endpoint should, but it's not a full REST API endpoint. It's not doing all the things it's required. This would not actively work. So if we go over here to Postman, you'll see that we're going to get that default HTML page I was just talking to you about. If this loads up, we'll go ahead and make a new page, add new request, paste in here, send, and you'll see we get that default page. So it looks like you have made it, but I'm guessing in your code you're never actually referring to this document. And if you are referring to this document, you're probably doing a lot of overhead stuff in order to render out this data. Is that correct? So I'm in your site right here. So in index, yeah. So you can see here in index, you're copying this data, this dummy data right here, and you're using this dummy data directly. You're not actually querying out to the REST API and API endpoint. You're not actually going here and grabbing that data in order to render your lists, correct? Yes, exactly. It's passed on as states. It's not actually querying the data and grabbing it and then displaying it. It's just grabbing its current state. Yes, exactly. So this isn't fully functioning and doesn't actually pass what we are requiring and needing. It's a good start. It's showing that you are trying and you're understanding kind of the base concepts, but the biggest pillar stone is that this is a separate application. We also, additionally, we weren't looking for a website because that is not a REST API endpoint. We were looking for some type of REST API endpoint that was being served to us. And don't worry, you weren't the only person to give us a fully functional application. We're not looking for fully functional applications. We're literally looking for just the back end. Also, yes, Castile, yours doesn't even run because you're exposing port 80, but you're not setting port 80. Yeah, I didn't even attempt to run it because I just reviewed the code and I was like, this won't even work. So code that you're giving us, for the love of God, make sure it works. Yeah, I didn't do the, I haven't checked any updates. So make sure it works. I don't care if it's working and not 100% correct, like how this is. At least it works. And I was able just to do the Docker and then compose and run it. And if you're giving us a README, I should be able to run the commands in the README and it should just work. If it doesn't, it's even worse. Because that means you dev something out and you either didn't actually test it or you quit on it halfway through, and we're not looking for quitters. Like worst case scenario, you could have been like, hey, I couldn't figure out the Docker shit, so here it is raw, and here's the Docker files that I was trying to use, but I need some help on it. The thing is, as a dev, you're going to fail a lot and constantly. You're going to be the world's biggest failures. Everyone here in this chat is a part of the world's biggest failure club. Get used to it. Get used to failing. Get used to be a loser and losing. All right? It's a part of the dev experience. It's a part of the learning experience because it mentally scars you so bad, you'll literally remember it and never do it that way again when you figure it out. Because you're like, shit, I was stuck on this stupid thing for 5 hours and it was just like one word that I needed to change. It scarred me internally. I have PTSD now. But I'll fucking remember. I'll remember not to do it that way again. It's all a part of the dev experience, and being a part of the dev community. So if you are uncomfortable with that, then you should probably not be a developer, because developers are for people who are okay with losing. That makes sense? I literally lost earlier when I was trying to give you guys the example, and I was like, nah, fuck, god damn it. Yes, exactly. Trial and error leads to success. It's all about trial and error. So next thing I would say is this code is extremely busy. So this data, if you are using dummy data somewhere, for the love of God, either put your dummy data underneath your functional code, because just in general, if I'm loading up a file and the first thing I see is a bunch of dummy data at the beginning and I have to scroll all the way to the bottom to see your functional code, you're gonna annoy me, and you're gonna annoy any other devs that you're working with on a production team or anywhere. If you have dummy stuff or dummy variables, put them at the end. No one wants to view that. So that way this is clear up front and I can just look at your logic. And if for some reason it needs to be defined at the beginning because it's going to error out your code, for the love of God, just make another file for holding it and import that file at the top. So that way I don't have to scroll through a bunch of nonsense in order to get to the actual functioning code at the bottom. Make it easy for people to look through stuff and maintain and edit it. Does that make sense? No, it's fine. You don't need to comment in English. If you are in a different country and people that are programming speak a different standard language than English, because some countries use English as the standard for when they're programming, like, use your native language. If this is normal, then do what's normal. Does anyone else want their code reviewed? So what I would have done if I were you, ADAF, is one of two things. One, either use Express, or two, look up a React middleware or an API, REST API endpoint tutorial. So if we go in here, do React REST API example. Let's click on this first link. And there's some setup here. And then that's for getting data. Let's see here. All right, this isn't. Does this have? No, this looks like it's just for getting data. So this isn't a very good example. But basically, please just look up a tutorial and use the tutorial, because we're going to be building upon it. And this is not cheating. This is not cheating. This is not copyright. This isn't any other term you want to use in your brain for justifying not to do it. Use code, steal code, recycle code. You are a green machine, so you are going to reduce, reuse, and recycle other code, whether it's your code, someone else's code. The whole point of open source is the code is open source, so you can take it, you can steal it, you can use it as you need. So that's the next thing is when I got some of your guys' applications, I was expecting a couple files, which pleasantly surprised Castile. I think you're the only one that gave just like a couple files, which I was like, all right, this is what I was expecting. For their first project, and let's review it again. Whatever we write, we literally mean it literally. We are not surprising you with extra crap. So when we say we want you to make a simple Docker container with a REST API exposed endpoint that's queryable, that's all we want. I don't care if it's literally built in any language and there's only one single endpoint and it's on the slash. Let me see right here. So if you go to like Flask quick start, if it was literally this small and you have one endpoint that's exposed that gives me a JSON dictionary result of like result in hello world, that is just fine. That is what we asked for. You better put that in a Docker container. I don't need full-on like blown services with a bunch of test data XYZ. The point is to start with something very, very simple, and every additional week, as you can see in this week, we are adding to it and we are making it more complicated. You don't need to use tokens. You don't need to do XYZ connected to a database. You can, but if you are going to do extra stuff, you better make sure that extra stuff fucking works. And if it doesn't work, then you better give us the minimum we were looking for, because I would rather see you have a solid understanding of the basics than failing and giving me broken code that's all messed up because you were trying something more advanced. Give us the basics. We're going to be going through with you to make it more complicated. This week is building upon that. So before, you could have had a simple one API endpoint in a Docker container that shit out some type of random data. I don't care. This week is now more advanced. You need a REST API endpoint for a simulated music store. So you don't have to have anything dictating it's a music store. That's just kind of the vibe we're going around right now. And you need to be able to have at least 3 endpoints. Those endpoints could be all GET endpoints. It does not matter. What does matter is that you should be able to put a new record up. So you should be doing some type of saving of that data that we're posting. So if you were using an app like this, if this is your put, obviously don't build a full-blown app, but let's say we were submitting this data to your endpoint, this should be saved off. Whether that's a database, a text file on disk, whatever, I don't care. It's totally up to you. But you should be able to collect data. I should be able to fetch data, whether you have some default data, but also this should include new data I've added. And I should be able to delete data from your endpoint. 3 things that all you need to do. I don't care how you do them. It just needs to be a proper REST API in order to interact with those items. That's why it will be nice to use something like Postman, because this can be your front-end quote-unquote website to interact with your API endpoints. Now, this is kind of a teaser right here of what your next tasking might be, because if we're learning about a database and we have a class tomorrow about SQL databases, stomp, 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 probably the next task for your REST API thing will be to use a database. So my project is not built. Yes, I know that. So it needs to persist past the end of life of the container. Yes. No. It needs to just be the container should depend on the existence of your application running. So if your application ever crashed or was no longer running, it will also crash the container. basically a crude app using REST. I'm not looking for any type of front end app at all. I just am looking for a REST endpoint, which means it should just look like what I've been showing you guys so far, which I think is on another tab. Did I delete or get rid of all of them? It should just be, come on, show me something. Did it already get rid of it all? It should just be the JSON response. That's all we're looking for, is a REST API. All it is sending me back some JSON data. We're only looking for JSON data. Don't send me freaking XML. I already told you guys XML isn't used anymore. JSON is the industry standard, so we're going to go around that. But it should be JSON data, and it should be flagged correctly in the headers. So in the headers, if I were to do an inspect element and look at the header for the file, it should say that the data type, which there's no data type in this one, it should say that it is application/JSON data. Does anyone else want their code reviewed? For Cotes, let's go ahead and pull it up. What was it, this one? So same issue with this one, along with ADAFs, is this should already be built. So hold on. Let me take down ADAFs real quick. So if we do a Docker compose up, and this is going to be on 2500. So same issue here for this one is that we got a web app, and this doesn't actually have an API exposed. Literally, you just followed the wrong tutorial because you followed the blog tutorial for Flask, which is not what we were looking for. It's not actually doing the exposures correctly. So you can see here, this is directly querying the database and then showing off that data in the web page. So this is an all-in-one solution. We're not looking for all-in-one solutions. We're looking for a middleware. We're looking for a REST API only. We're not looking for server-side generation of content, because this means that now any dev that continues this on needs direct access to the database in order to develop the website further. So this was also done incorrectly. The queries were there, and you're using the simulated DB through the Flask stuff, which is fine, but it needs to be a proper REST API endpoint. It can't be auto-generating web pages. Any questions on that? So throughout the week, it's best to turn in your code early, because all you're going to do is increase your chances of being potentially removed from the internship, because we're not holding up for anyone. We are chugging along and we are moving forward, and things need to be done when they are assigned. This is a job. And just like in a job, your company doesn't have time to hold up because you can't keep up. You're going to lose your job. So we are going to be moving forward with tasks. We are not going to be including tech debt. Tech debt is a technical term usually used in the industry in regards to you're chugging along and you forget to do some things properly or things need to be revisited. That's called accruing tech debt, which means that you need to pause development potentially in the future for X amount of time in order to go back and revisit your tech debt in order to repair or fix or maintain whatever needs to be fixed, repaired, or maintained. We don't have time for that. We're chugging along. So if you are behind, catch up. If you submitted something wrong, correct it. If you want a code review before the assignment's due, you submit it early. And don't submit us like half broken, half, code like early. If you have questions, you can ask us questions specifically, but don't send us stuff and be like, can you check this out and tell me like if this is I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example right now. You can ask questions about your code and we'll check it out, but don't like submit it unless it's completely done. But do submit it earlier than later, because when Sunday rolls along or Monday or whatever that day is for you guys on whatever time zone you're on comes along, like we can tell you after the fact, but now you're compounding on top of what needs to be done this week. For this week's assignment, how are we meant to send audio files through JSON? Payload could be potentially huge. First of all, this does not need to include audio files. This can be purely, the records can be purely the ID, the name of the record, how long it is, and maybe the URL location to where the file is in somewhere else. You don't need actual audio files. You can just simulate everything else. You don't need to have all those items I just named to you. Keep some of them because it's supposed to be music store themed. So maybe you should have the song's name. If you only gave us the song's name, that would be sufficient. Ideally, to help yourself and to help yourself on future lessons, maybe think through it a little bit more. Maybe there should be ID tied to everything. Maybe you should include how long it is. We're not expecting you to actually be sending us audio files. If you are sending us audio files, it should be done either via telling us where that audio file resource is in the JSON response, or you can send it through the body, which yes, sometimes payloads are very big. Or if you were running a streaming service, it would be pointing to some other resource. I think we are meant to just send the titles, genres. Yes. That's all we are expecting. At a minimum, we're expecting the titles, but if you send more, it's going to be better that way. It's going to help you out when we get to the database stuff. What do you think of the group-specific projects I have been doing? We'll talk to you guys individually in regards to your group-specific projects. We won't get into it right now, but those of you that have been doing everything for your group-specific projects fine, you know that you're doing fine. If you're not doing fine, you know that you're not doing fine. Any other questions you guys have in regards to this? Your taskings, cores. API gateway. I'm pretty sure only, 2 or 3 of you did the tasks in regards to researching these Amazon services. If you didn't do them, which you know who you are, you better catch up because we didn't assign you any extra AWS stuff this time. We simply assigned Maria. This should say use, not user. So learn and use means you need to learn how to use Maria, and you should spin up a MariaDB instance. You do not have to use it in this, but just use it, do a query or two. We'll have a class tomorrow in regards to it. If you didn't research the API Gateway, S3, and Lambda about Amazon, AWS, catch up this week. It's added to your rest of your tasks. API Gateway is a way where you can expose your API very easily to the rest of the world, and Amazon will automatically handle keys, connections, logging of how many usages you're getting, so forth. For example, some services will pay on use of hitting their API endpoint. So for example, OpenAI pricing. If you want to use OpenAI's endpoint, they're going to charge you this price. How do you track this? You can build it out manually, or you can use a service like API Gateway to track everything that's coming through, and they can then tell you how much data or XYZ was used, and then you can charge based off of that to your end user. It makes it very easy. Additionally, you guys should be looking up what S3 is and figure out what this is. There's convenient videos with each one of them, and I believe they have videos for a variety of different languages. So if you want to watch a video in your native language, there should be videos for most languages around the world. I would be surprised if they don't have it for all the major languages like Arabic, French, and so forth. And then you also needed to look up Lambdas. Lambdas are super cool. If you think cloud computing is super expensive and running a server is expensive, well, maybe Lambda is what you're going to want to use, because the pricing on it is very, very cheap. We're talking about fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a cent. Even in, third world countries where the US dollar is a lot, this is still pretty damn cheap in your country. And this can easily allow you to make full-blown AAA applications like a West Coast startup would in a third world country while keeping your costs to an absolute minimum. So this is something that's very valuable that you may want to look into. Additionally, Lambda, if you hook it up to API Gateway, takes a lot of the work off of your shoulders. This isn't just, when I use this as an expression for you to do stuff very cheaply in third world countries, does not mean this is meant for third world country users. Everyone uses this shit. We're using this stuff internally in Rootkit to build out some of our own services because it is so cheap. You only get charged when something runs on Lambda. And the best part is, this is pricing, but this pricing only takes effect after you use up your free tier usage, which I can't. They usually list their free tier usage, but if you want to see how cheap this really is, if you're running on a normal computer and you're getting, say your website popped off, you're super viral, your service is insane, and you're getting a million, what is this? 10 million requests every single month to your site. So there are 10 million requests. These are your API requests. So maybe a single user session every day is, potentially they use on average like 100 requests every day. Regardless, you have 10 million requests, and each request, when they hit Lambda, and in order for them to be processed completely successfully, let's say each request takes 50 milliseconds to compute and calculate out. And these are just microservices, so they don't need very much memory. So let's say on average you need 256 megabytes of memory. Well, we can go out here and you can see that you are going to use a total of $1.80 USD in order to run your website now. That just got deleted. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 50 milliseconds, 256 megs of memory, $1.80. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure you can afford that if you're, and I'm pretty sure you're going to, sorry, I should rephrase that. I'm pretty sure you will be able to afford that if your site is getting 10 million requests every single month. It means you probably did something well, and you're probably able to, make money either from ad revenue or from doing a subscription service from your users and cover that $1.80 a month cost, which is predicted. Does that make sense? Let's say you think that 256 megs are really low for your app and it's going to take more like a gig for some reason. You're doing something crazy. Well, now you're up to a total of $3.50 USD. Still 10 million requests a month. Let's say it's going to take 100 milliseconds instead. $11.80. I don't think you're going to do very much that will take 100 milliseconds for your response. So I think you'll be good on that. Questions? Any questions on AWS? Maybe services you ran into that you have questions about or want to know more about? Anything that came up in your research that you didn't make sense to you? S3 is another way if you want to keep your costs stupid low and you generate static sites. So if you're a web dev and you are using Next you can generate static sites from your website. What is a static site? It's literally just HTML in pure JavaScript, and all you do is access the HTML pages. In your next application, this isn't a next application, but in your next application, there's a command you can run where it will generate a dist folder, so your distribution folder, and it will generate an HTML page for every single page possible of your website. That can be accessed via just clicking the HTML pages, and you can just load in a web browser and it should just work, which means you don't need to pay for full-blown hosting. If they are just straight up HTML pages and you can view that just by clicking on the HTML page and your site shows up, you can use something potentially as S3 to do your web hosting, which S3 is usually 100% free. 100% free depending on how much you're using on it. How much are we talking about? Well, let's go ahead and type in, hopefully S3 works. There we go. 5 gigabytes free. You have 5 gigabytes of storage for your photos, your HTML files, XYZ for free. And all you have to pay for is the data that gets transferred out. So if someone visits your site and data is sent out, you'll need to pay for that. How much is that? Well, 2 cents, 2.3 cents per gigabyte of data that's sent out from your S3 bucket. So every gigabyte of web pages that are sent out and loaded, which is a lot of a gigabyte of web page traffic is a lot of traffic, unless you have just insanely large photos, is another way to keep you cheap. Zero hosting costs. All you have to do is pay for the data that goes over the wire. Sorry, this is for storage. This is the data transfer costs. So all data transfer in is free, and then going out to the internet is 9 cents per gigabyte. So any data you send to S3, whether it's megabytes to petabytes in size, 100% free. Anything going out is going to be 9 cents per gigabyte. There are no hosting fees. You purely, as traffic grows on your site, you purely just pay this cost based off of how much data you transfer out. S3 is purely storage. All you do, they're called buckets. Buckets are basically, you can kind of think of as folders. And the folders will hold data. What type of data? Whatever the hell you want. You want that data not exposed to the public internet? You can do that. You want it exposed to the public internet so you could run some type of, I don't know, basic HTML website? You can do that. You can assign a URL to that bucket and then serve that out on a proper web page or website. That's just fine. It's just basically straight up file. It's like basically File Explorer. So with this, with my folders and data in it, that is what S3 basically is. It's just for bulk storage. And it's very fast and very reliable. And like you just use it. Any other questions? Researching Dynamo when searching Lambda. I'm confused on the wide column. So DynamoDB is there's two major database types. There's SQL and NoSQL databases. So if we go to databases here, you can either get a normal SQL database, which there are two different types you can use. There's RDS, which is relational data structure. I believe that's what it says. Relational database service, my bad. Which is the normal SQL databases you know and love. Which ones are we talking about? I think we have to go to pricing. Here you go. So you can use, don't look at this one. We'll go over this one in a second, but whoops. You can use MySQL, Postgres, Maria, an Oracle database, a Microsoft SQL database. You can use any of these databases in RDS. If you want a cheaper alternative, because using these databases can be more expensive because they're not Amazon owned databases, you can use Amazon Aurora, which is their own version of a MySQL database, or I should just say a SQL database, and it's compatible with all MySQL and PostgreSQL commands, and it is cheaper pricing wise than using the normal RDS databases. So these alternatives, because if you click on MySQL, this might be out of your price range because you're going to be paying for the micro 1.6 cents an hour, and if we do the math here, I believe it's 750 hours in a month times 0.016, so it'll be $12 USD a month to run that database. Now, this isn't the case. Usually these micros are in their free tier, so when you sign up for Amazon, you'll get access to usually free training. So you can see there's free training for their services, and you will get access also to free tier of their services, which means you can run a lot of their services for completely free if they're like the smallest tier. Additionally, every big company you know of uses Amazon Cloud Services. Well, most of them use Amazon Cloud Services. A couple use Google, and a variety of other ones may use Alibaba. I'm not quite sure what the standing is for China and Alibaba is in each one of your individual countries, but obviously US isn't the most friendly in regards to China, so you're going to be very hard pressed to find a US company that uses Alibaba services. So back to Dynamo. This was SQL based, and then there's NoSQL databases. So if we go over here to databases, there is Aurora, and there are, sorry, not Aurora serverless. There's Dynamo, and where are there? I don't know where their other ones are, but basically, not Aurora. So I guess there's a serverless version which would keep down your costs. So this is something you might want to look at if you are doing a database and you don't want to run it and pay that $12 a month. So this is going to be a lot cheaper. So 20 cents per 1 million requests. So a lot cheaper. So you might want to look in that instead. So Aurora is a NoSQL database. Other NoSQL databases would be that Disney, Dropbox, Snap, and Zoom all use Aurora. So if you want to use a NoSQL database, you can use Dynamo. You can use MongoDB, which is another massive alternative. And then a big industry one would be Elasticsearch. Another version would be Elasticsearch, which is usually a part of the Elk stack, if you've ever heard of that. So knowing what they are and the differences of it is going to make you very powerful. And if you are interested in working in any of these companies, for the love of God, this is another reason why you need to learn and use AWS, because a lot of these companies will hire you purely if you have AWS training and their certifications. So if you go here, AWS digital training, usually they're all for free. You learn their practitioner or any of these essential courses, get the certification, you can get a job right off the bat. Depending on what country you are, your pay will vary, but in the US, you can easily land a DevOps job. So this would be for DevOps. Typically, you can land a DevOps job with the proper AWS certs for easily like $80,000. Any questions on that? Yeah, 80,000 is a lot. If you don't believe me, you can literally Google it. AWS certification job salary. And you can look here. If you have these certifications, this is the average salary you would make with those certifications for AWS. USD in North America. So North America includes Canada and Mexico. So this is an easy alternative to saying, fuck you, college. I want to make money. I want to make it now. Take these, learn them, use them, then apply for jobs. You're going to be limited typically to DevOps jobs or system ops jobs, so more like IT. If you want to be a developer, I guess they have a certified developer associate. So this will be learning how to use their developer tools, but you're also going to need to know how to use programming. So having something like this with a rootkit certification would be a good combo in trying to help you land one of those jobs. Yeah, so like I said, it varies for your country. If you're in North America, according to this is what you're going to be looking at. But the same thing stands in regards that if you get these certs, you can get a job. I don't know what your various pay will be in different countries, but you will get a job. That's what I can guarantee is you will get a job that is paying you well for whatever the normal wage in your country is. Look, those of you that think college is necessary in your country, it's as necessary as it is in the U.S. It is a new phenomenon that you can get jobs with certifications. Rootkit is one of the pioneers in that space. It's very new. You can do it though. I did it. I have no college degree, and I made it in the industry, and I can make very good money, which I'm no longer doing because I'm moving to Rootkit full time, which pays absolutely $0. Didn't you go to Maryland University? No. Kind of. Not really. I don't have any degrees, if that's the main answer. When I was in the Army, they sent me to some specific programming classes for a pipeline thing, which was facilitated not by the University of Maryland, but by a sub company they own that isn't actually tied to the university in any way. It's like a for-profit company that just uses the branding of the university, but they are absolutely in no way tied to the university at all. And so, but before that, before I even joined the Army, I was doing freelance web dev work and other various like niche jobs. And that was, commission work. And I was making typically anywhere between $30 to $50 an hour. So if you are currently in college, this is not me saying quit it right now, but what I would say is get our certification and maybe apply to some jobs and see if you can get the jobs without finishing your college degree. If you're not in college yet, and you're considering going to college, try get one of our certifications and then just apply to jobs and see if you can get those jobs right off the bat. Because I promise you, you're probably going to get the jobs off the bat. And regardless of where you're deving, the thing is, devs and companies with software developers will always pay a shit ton of money. Because with a small team of devs, you can make a service that millions of people potentially use and can bring in infinite money potentially. Like you can look at companies like, I don't know, Google. Everyone knows what Google is. Google employees. Employee count. So Google has 35,000 full-time staff members. Some of these are developers, some of these interns, some of these are technicians, but regardless, that's how many employees they have. And if we do some simple math, Google has that many employees. Let's open up the tab here. Google revenue for 2021. Google brought in $257 billion. So if we do $257 billion USD, that's billion, correct? And we divide that by their employees. So their employees was 100 and how many? 35,000 divided by 135,000. Google is making on average almost $2 million USD for every employee they have in their company. They have a lot of money. They can pay their devs a shit ton of money, but they don't usually pay their devs the maximum amount they want. Google on average does pay some of the highest salaries in the dev world, but regardless, companies that use software devs get a massive return on investment for every employee they have. So, and there is a massive shortage of devs worldwide right now. People are desperate for devs because if you make internet products, you can make a lot of money pretty quickly, and devs are in a lot of, I guess, from being in line in a lot of other countries besides North America, pretty low, which means that the people on top are probably making a lot of money. Now, this also varies because if the average income for your country is, let's say, 500 USD, a subscription service for $1 USD a month would make more sense than how it is in America, where a lot of subscription services might be like, $15 a month. which is probably not practical for a lot of third world countries. So you will take a reduction in income based off of that fact, but the devs that they're paying for are taking a way larger reduction in pay than what their subscription services are usually associating. Are we supposed to get the level 1 certification for passing the exam? Yes, you guys will all be issued level 1 cert. You guys all are cert holders right now. We just haven't made the pretty picture to send you guys, but they are issued. So the level 1 cert you might be able to get a job with. We're pretty sure like level 1 cert is kind of just you understand the basics of that language. I don't know any job specifically personally that will hire you with just the level 1 cert. You kind of just need the level 2 cert to get a job, because that is a solid computer science degree equivalent. And depending on who you ask, it is far superior than most college degrees. It's like the equivalent of going to in the US, Harvard. In the UK, God, what's the big fucking school? The Ivy League school in the UK. It's like the equivalent of going, Oxford or Cambridge. Yes. It's like going to one of those if you get that certification, because it's literally, you're getting taught things that colleges will not teach you, period. And if you look simply, I mean, Castile can verify this for you guys. If you literally go to the level 2 certification and you look at some of the items in here, like operating systems, I'm pretty sure a lot of these items you have not covered in college, and you will not be covering in college. Specific things like work member groups, domain members, a lot of the terminal commands. So for your DOS commands or your PowerShell commands, I don't even think they'll teach you PowerShell commands in college. For Unix commands, I highly doubt you're going to learn a fraction of these commands when you're in college, especially the common systems directories and going through an overview. So knowing these are going to make you a huge power play, especially when it comes to kernel design. Literally, these are very advanced things. Right now, we're talking internally for rootkit in maybe moving our current level 2 certification to level 3 and making a lighter version of this as a level 2 computer science degree equivalent, since it is so much more and so much better than what you're getting. It also includes, it means that it's also takes longer for you to get this certification. That makes sense? Any other questions? Yep. All right. So if there are no other questions, you guys can go ahead and skedaddle out of here. Remember, we got the class tomorrow for databases, so be ready for that.